I look like a hot mess. Everything has gone wrong. And I feel like that's pretty standard for what my life is. So we're just gonna roll with it. Hello, everybody. My name is Danny Rose, and I am an author and a musician. And I wanted to start a podcast. Part of the reason why I wanted to do a podcast about writing is when I first started writing my novel, I didn't know what to do. And it was a very weird journey for me to discovering how that entire world looks. And my first time I was ever published, I was 11. I was published in a poetry collection that my school did. And I wasn't the only one. There were 5 or 6 of us in my school, in my grade, that were published in the same book. But I don't really know a whole lot about how that looked on the back end. A lot of it was our teacher took us somewhere, gave us a couple of different subjects that we could write with, different styles that we could write, and she said, "Here you go, have fun." And so I just kind of went with that. And that was the first time I had ever been published. It was the first time I had ever done poetry, and I loved it. Oh, I loved it. And I continued writing poetry for a while. I was published a couple more times throughout high school. And then as an adult, my writing focus shifted from your standard poetry formats towards lyrics. And then I started working as an aspiring musician. And I was so excited in 2020 because I got that wonderful little blue check mark on Spotify, and that moment was just so intense for me. The song is trash. Like, don't get me wrong. If you listen to it, it was very clearly produced and recorded in my attic at my old home. Like, you could tell. I leave it up because it's my beginning. And I feel it's important to recognize and appreciate where you start before you can continue the rest of your story. And another reason why I'm doing this podcast is for that same exact concept. It's a record of how I started, and hopefully I can also help people not make some of the same mistakes I did, or find some of the ways that I did work something out, and then they can benefit from that as well. One thing that I ended up doing was I self-published, but I actually ended up creating my own publishing company, which kind of started the whole Chaotic Rose Media concept. When I started doing music, it was very much, oh, I'm gonna do it myself because then I can prevent all of the problems that you constantly hear people talk about. Like, oh, the boy bands. Did you hear what happened with them? Oh my goodness. Or like my favorite bands, like there's one band that I absolutely love to death. I am so sorry if you hear pitter patters in the background. My dog will not lay down and I can't send her outside because it's snowing. There's a band that I absolutely adore. It's called Icon for Hire. Like, Ariel is amazing. I love their music. But they used to have representation. And then you find out what happened with their record label and why they moved into this indie on their own status. And I didn't really want to mess with that. So I decided I would do Rose Thorn Records because, again, I'm obsessed with roses. And it was a good attempt. A good portion of that was just lack of follow through. And I genuinely learned a lot. And I feel like that's one of the reasons that has been very beneficial in kind of rebranding that concept into the Chaotic Rose Records element. And I am very excited to see how that journey goes. I know that Melanie Nix are wonderfully amazing and talented artist. She also has her own podcast called the Nix's Podcast, and her socials are going to be here, link here, all that fun stuff. My fingers are blue if you're watching this on YouTube. My children and I were doing cupcakes earlier, and so yeah, that's always fun, right? But I'm really excited to see where Nyx goes with her career. I think Melanie Nyx is a wonderfully talented person. I'm very excited to be a part of her journey as a solo artist. And her podcast has been absolutely phenomenal. If you haven't had a chance to check out the latest episode, make sure you do, because it's so good. Outside of this first initial episode, some of the topics that I'm going to be discussing are going to be how developing characters helps, and different tips and tricks that I have found that helped me create the characters that I have, how to kind of limit some of your characters, because when you're writing something, you want to have like this rich, full story, but you got to learn like when is enough, and kind of force yourself to pull back a little bit. World building, how to create a universe that is very engaging and everything like that. Villain arcs. This one is a subject that I absolutely love, because I feel like a story can either make or break itself with however the villain is portrayed. Like, are you going to give me a villain that has reasons why they are the way they are, or are you going to go just like absolute chaos and like no one has any idea what's going on at any point in time, and the villain's just like, fuck it, let's burn it, you know? Like, even the Joker has a background story, and he explains like 5 different versions depending on what you're reading or what you're watching, you know, why he is the way he is, sometimes within the same storyline. But it's important to have that concept, that point of view created, and it's something that I am very passionate about. I like engaging villains. I like it when there's a possibility that a villain may want or may serve a main character vibe. My dog has decided she needs attention. She's not going to go outside because it's snowing. It's actually really nice to see the snow for once. I live in the middle of the United States, and usually when it comes to winter, like, we get a pretty decent sized snowfall closer to about the middle of November. We didn't get anything this year, like, at all, and it sucked. Oh, it sucked. I don't think my kids have actually had like a real snow day at all. So my children are 8 and 7, and every time they go to school, something happens. You know, at first it was interrupted with quarantine, and then we moved, and so like their educational pathway has not been very, you know, typical, like a lot of kids their age. But so far they haven't really had a chance to have like a full-on snow day. So I'm hoping that this snow that I'm looking at outside like actually does something, because it'd be kind of cool for them to get a snow day. I used to love snow days, but they don't really happen very much anymore. Anyways, sidetrack. Another element that I want to discuss are plot points. You know, how do you move from point A to point B? How do you end your book? What's a good way to start your book? Doing things like poetry, discussing that. I want to do some book reviews. You know, I want to see people ask me, hey, can you read this book and then give us your thoughts? You know, I ask people to do the same thing for my novel. I would love it if people, you know, read my novel and then told me what they think. I do like to brag because my novel currently has a 5-star rating on Amazon. Granted, there's only 6 reviews, but I'm still excited for it. You know, and it's that moment where even the small little connections that you have with people, it's so amazing when somebody connects with your story. And it may not change how they live their life. It may not change how they speak to another human being, but it's still that moment where they're like, I could not put it down. I loved everything about it. And my favorite part is The only negative thing I have to say is I hate how it ended. And I'm okay with that. If you ever get a chance to read it, there's a reason why people have told me that, and a lot of it has to do with the fact that I haven't finished writing the sequel yet. And that's fair. That's very fair. I would love to bring on some other writers as guest hosts, whether it's novels, poetry, lyrics that they write for their music, whether it is that they write graphic novels. I'd love to bring on people who do the storylining and the art for graphic novels, whether that's just one person or whether there's multiple people. I'd love to have that as well. I would like to maybe bring on a couple of people who have read my novel, because I can sit here and tell you about my novel all day, but you all know that I'm gonna love my novel. I poured my heart and soul into it, and so I'm always going to see it in that light. I'd like to bring some other people in who, I apologize about the background noise. My kids are watching TV, and if you're a parent, you know. And so I feel like it would be really fun. If you have any suggestions, anybody that you'd love to see come on, feel free to drop them in the comments below. If you're watching this on YouTube, or you can shoot me a message, we can definitely do that. Make sure you follow all of the social medias. We've got Chaotic Rose Media on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. My tags are Danny Rose on everything except for Instagram. Instagram, it's Danny.Rose. Yeah. Make sure you spell Danny right. It's D-H-A-N-I. D-H-A-N-I. I usually have to spell that like 3 or 4 times for people, but hey, I love my name. It's not a typical American name. So the other element with this podcast that I want to discuss and feature is going to be some mental health elements. Part of the reason why I have taken so long to sit down and actually record everything is I have ADHD, so that executive dysfunction is always so much fun. But I also suffer from pretty bad depression, and I go through bouts of suicidal ideation almost daily. And before you worry, I am in therapy. Like that's definitely something that I've already proactively taken care of. And honestly, my novel is a very direct correlation to mental health. Not all of the stories that take place in my novel have happened to me directly. A vast majority of them have. And obviously there's going to be some things that haven't. I mean, like there's a lot of murder in this entire storyline, and that's not something I have intimate knowledge of. Some of these are fictionalized based off of stories that other people who have given me permission to use their stories have informed me about. But a huge portion of that book are things that I myself am processing. And the novel itself started out as what was originally intended to be my suicide letter. And I came off that edge that day. And while I was doing it, somebody had recommended that I try to turn something that was very negative and very horrific for me into something beautiful. And I get told a lot that I have a really good way with words, especially if I write them down, because I have a chance to go back and re-review it and edit it, you know, all of that fun stuff. And I started expanding on it. And before I knew it, I had 100 pages written. And I was just kind of like, okay, we're doing this. I think another part of the reason why I'm overly proud of it is because of that whole like ADHD thing. It's something I actually completed. And it did go through so many rewrites. Like, it is nowhere near now the same as it was when I first started. But that's an important element when it comes to writing, is you have to be willing to do those rewrites. You have to be willing to look at a spot in your work and say, this isn't what it needs to be. This isn't right. This isn't meeting the storyline that I need it to. This isn't meeting my goals like I need it to. It doesn't help tell the story like it should. And you have to be willing to delete it, and you have to be willing to separate with it. You also have to be understanding that there's going to be some things that you have to expand on. And I feel like that's where a good portion of that hesitation comes from for a lot of people, is that whole concept of, I don't really want to just cut something out. Like, if I write it, I write it. But sometimes you need to take a second and you need to realize, is this really what I need? And I feel like that's part of the reason why I want to do this podcast. But I'm going to keep this first episode a little bit on the shorter side. I realize that for YouTube, this is kind of a long video, but we're going to go with it anyways. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, topics that you'd like to see covered, please feel free to let me know. Hit up all of our social medias. Check out the other podcasts that are associated with mine. And if you have... And if you're listening to this, make sure that you give this a rating. 5 stars is greatly appreciated. And make sure that you hit the subscribe buttons. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you give me a link and put in there for a comment something associated with this topic, because YouTube cares about customer satisfaction and they're going to ding me if the comments have nothing to do with the topic. So, as we all are aware, thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye. This podcast has been a presentation of Chaotic Rose Media. Pricks with Pens is hosted by Danny Rose. It is produced, directed, and recorded and edited by Danny Rose. Copyright January 2023.